Queen Elizabeth II, Britain's longest reigning monarch, passed away on Thursday. The Queen died peacefully at her Balmoral residence in Scotland, surrounded by her family.
She was 96 years old and had been on the throne for 70 years. And in the wake of her passing, we spoke to some journalists who reflected on her legacy.
This is BBC News from London. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
I would describe her as a true person, somebody who's got that backbone and stays true to her word.
Someone who did not present herself as a celebrity. She presented herself as something more, as a presence.
A life that spans a world war, the first moon landing, the birth of the internet, and the dawn of the 21st century is extraordinary indeed.
This afternoon she brought onto the balcony the three kings who will one day do the job she has done.
Born Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor in 1926, she acceded to the throne aged just 25 after the death of her father, King George VI, in 1952.
I think she brought stability to the monarchy.
Arlene Prinsloo is a journalist and royal enthusiast.
She brought the monarchy into the modern age. If you think that her coronation was the first one to be televised, and I think for a lady of 96, she could adapt to the modern world. She was the first monarch to send a tweet.
Elizabeth was celebrated for her unwavering service, her dry sense of humour, and for making everyone feel at home.
She represents a kind of psychological symbol for British people and people perhaps in the Commonwealth of continuity, of tradition.
As a young journalist, Hamilton Wendy had a brief encounter with Her Majesty on her 1995 visit to South Africa.
She was moving through the crowd, meeting people, and she finally came to our little group. And then I said, you know, Your Majesty, I'm from South Africa. And she looked at me and she said, you know, I do so love South Africa. And I was just about to say, thank you, Your Majesty, when my German colleague interrupted and said, yeah, Your Majesty, but you know, the crime here is just terrible. And she looked at him with these extraordinary blue eyes of hers, and there was a sort of a pause. And she said, well, you know, it must be so terribly difficult for young people these days. Yet she responded with dignity, and she responded in a very human way.
I personally experienced her poise and good humour firsthand, albeit briefly and at a distance. In 1995, I visited London with Carte Blanche producer Diana Lucas to meet Britain's so-called royal watchers.
If I knew where Charles was with Camilla at this very moment, I would be there, I promise you.
The Queen had visited St Luke's Hospital and was ambling past.
And there is an enormous crowd, and we're right at the back. So, desperation, I started having to push Derek forward.
The British media are a strange lot. They'll shout out at politicians, ministers, but the Queen is sacred. And yet I'm with this producer that insists that I shout out at the Queen.
Excuse me, hello.
Mom? Carte Blanche, South Africa. Look forward to your visit.
Thank you very much.
Looking forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks' time. And she must have thought, you know, who is this lot from somewhere in southern Africa who's not sticking to protocol? But she handles the moment. That dedication to good manners enabled Elizabeth to navigate the royal family through a changing world, in which royals became celebrities whose scandals were fodder for the paparazzi and social media.
The rest of the royal family, they go up and down and there's sensational stories and blah, blah, blah. But the Queen has just steadfastly followed her path and the path that she set for herself, or that the destiny set for her.
But that destiny is not universally celebrated.
Certainly mixed emotions, especially in Africa, about her death.
Chris Marrowling is the Executive Director of Good Governance Africa.
and especially from younger generations. We've seen a very stark confrontation of this legacy of the British colonial empire.
Elizabeth was born into an empire on which the sun never set. Through the 20th century, she presided over independence celebrations in one African country after another.
I ask you all to join me in a toast to the President of the Republic of Namibia and to the happiness and prosperity of Namibia and its people.
But was she simply helping Britain gloss over its ugly colonial past?
People conflate, unfortunately, Queen Elizabeth II, the personality who has died, with the terrible legacy of the colonial experience. And I think it's important to distinguish, even though we are not trying to rebrand what was a bad experience of colonialism, by and large, for many Africans.
Elizabeth's sense of duty was legendary, and she rarely took a day off. In the very week of her death, she welcomed Liz Truss as Britain's new Prime Minister.
That whole work ethic, that she wanted to see this through, and she did. She was doing her job right up till the end.
With the passing of essentially the only reigning monarch of modern-day Britain, what is the future of the monarchy?
As the Queen herself did with such unswerving devotion, I too now solemnly pledge myself, throughout the remaining time God grants me, to uphold the constitutional principles at the heart of our nation.
Soon to be crowned King Charles III at 73, Elizabeth's heir is the oldest monarch ever to accede to the British throne.
He's waited a long time to become king. It's an internship of more than 6 decades.
I think we may see a very diminished role, far removed from the direct role that the Queen Elizabeth had with Africa, as opposed to the contemporary experience that we could have of King Charles III.
It will take time before Charles is crowned. For now, the British people will be in mourning until the Queen is laid to rest. Thanks so much for watching, and we love sharing these unique and eye-opening stories with you. By the way, if you have friends and family living overseas, they can also join in on the Carte Blanche conversation. Tell them to find Carte Blanche, the podcast, now on all major podcast platforms.